Mention that for those of you who aren't familiar with MediaPost, we do more than 20 of these events here and in Europe throughout the year. And a number of people who've spoken today I think might be interested, and I'd love to have some of you, especially on the brand and the agency side, come to some of our other conferences that are really grounded in a lot of different and focusing on a lot of different areas of digital marketing. For instance, we do what we call the Insider Retreats, Insider Summits. And these are retreats, intimate retreats, where about 120 marketers and agencies come together for 3 days in a resort setting to share their best practices and ideas. It's a very different experience, but we do, for instance, every December for the last 15 years, we've been doing these retreats on email and search in Park City, Utah. We're going to do those again in early December. And then next year we'll be doing we'll be focusing on TV and video, but we'll also be doing brand summits down in Austin before South by Southwest. If you look at the MediaPost site and you'll see our schedule of upcoming events, I'm always looking for interesting brand stories. And that's a good place to hand it over to Amy Fries, because this was one of the more interesting stories that that I got to explore and talk about before this event. Amy, as any of you know, and you're going to hear from Amy in a second to tell you the details of this better than I can, convincing people to be part of the National Marrow Donors Program, that's a heavy lift when it comes to marketing. There's a lot of explaining to do, there's a lot of convincing to do, there's a lot of consoling to do, and there's a lot of reassuring to do. But then on top of that, needing to diversify your base is another challenge. And as I was talking to Amy, the story here behind not only their use of multiple channels to drive people towards the donor program, but then the ways in which they came at using grassroots efforts to build community before they did their marketing effort to diversify their base was fascinating. And I think a real good case study in what we mean when we talk about authentic marketing and what authenticity really means for a marketer. So to tell this story, we want to welcome Amy Fries. She's the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Multicultural Growth at Be The Match. She'll be telling you much more about this program than I ever could, but her job is to do exactly this, to grow and diversify the base of the donor program at Be The Match. Please welcome Amy Fries.
Thanks, Steve. Hello. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here today. I have to say, just like Kimberly said, that she was a roadblock between her discussion or her presentation and lunch. I feel like I'm the roadblock between lunch and a cat nap. So if I see anybody nodding their heads, or like, I might just come out there and tap you on the shoulder. I first want to thank Steve Smith and Andrew Eklund, the President and CEO of Cicerone, for inviting me to be here today. I too am very new to the medical community, and I have a history, obviously, in my career of strategic partnerships and multicultural marketing. What I would say, though, rather than go through it, you can find that on my bio on the website. But I never thought that I'd be here when I first started my career with the Minnesota Timberwolves in the NBA in strategic partnerships and marketing, and I was, center court trying to fill cheeks and seats, that I'd be talking about how we are garnering donor recruitment with a company like Be The Match. So I am humbled, actually, to be a part of the organization, and I'm thrilled to be here to present to you what we're doing in our space. I think you'll find that it's very innovative, and it's just work in progress, for sure. So before I begin, how many hands, who knows, who's heard of the National Marrow Donor Program? Okay, great. And who's heard of Be The Match? And who knew that the National Marrow Donor Program was Be The Match? Nobody's raising their hand. So that's amazing. So we obviously are consistently in the battle of a 30-year organization battling a brand awareness challenge. And not only that, but then once we get the word out about what we do, convincing people why they should be interested. So I'm going to take you through some of the ways in which it's a very grassroots presentation. I don't have a lot of eye candy. I have a lot of actual work behind the scenes of building our campaign. I hope next year when I'm back, I can show you a lot of that eye candy, because we're in the throes of really creating a lot of it, although we do have some proven techniques we've been doing through digital media. But the grassroots portion is in work in progress right now. So our mission is that we save lives through cell therapy. And our vision is to democratize cell therapy for equal outcomes for all. We have approximately 8.5 million donors registered on our registry. We've had, in the last year, in 2017, 9,500 formal searches made, so that when there is somebody who has a blood disease, lymphoma, leukemia, sickle cell, and they go to the doctor and they provided options, and a transplant is one of those options, they can formalize a search, and so that's where that number comes from. And out of those searches, we had 6,100 transplants in 2017. Since our inception 30 years ago, we have resulted in 86,000 transplants. And on the left is just a little bit, or I'm sorry, on your right is just a little bit more about our organization. Why we exist is to provide people access to unrelated bone marrow transplants. Approximately 70% of the population who are diagnosed with a blood disease do not have what you call a related match. So somebody in your family who could donate a stem cell or bone marrow to cure your disease. 30% do. So the 70% that go to a formal search our registry. The doctors research it, and we have a process that basically takes anybody through whether or not they'll find a perfect match to be called to donate. And so this past year, on an average, 18,000 people are searching consistently. And if I were to go back to the fact that we had over 6,000 transplants last year, that means that 2/3 of the base are not able to find a match. The day that we could say that we are serving 18,000 is the day that I don't have a job, which is something that we talk about all the time, because that would be a really good thing. Why is it that we are in this situation? There are many reasons. There are many hurdles, barriers, if you will. Some are financial. Some are related to their insurance or what have you, which is somewhat financial. But primarily, where we're at with our registry base and in the population across the country is that the lack of finding a match is based on your background. And so as you can see, African American or Black communities have a 23% chance in finding a match. And as you go through the other ethnicities here, Asian Pacific Islander, Hispanic, American Indian, or Alaska Native, the numbers increase. And then obviously as a Caucasian patient, the chances are 77%. And we know that there are a lot of reasons why we're at this place. A lot of it is education. A lot of it is the fact that we're not directing our marketing in a way that is effective for the communities that are lacking matches. And so that's how we have really structured our strategic objective going into our fiscal next year. We've done a lot of learning, and I'm going to share a lot of that with you today. But the premise is that the Be the Match registry is not adequately reflective of the U.S. population, and this has led to mismatched transplant rates greater than 40% in underserved populations. So that is what we are working on that is what we're living on to really come up with how we're going to reach ethnically diverse communities. The idea is to determine the optimal size and composition of the registry and launch a campaign that expedites that level of quality participation. So again, I'm not showing you a lot of creative. I'm really showing you the tactical and structured guidelines. I'm not going to go through every slide and read all the copy, but the basis of what we're building on is the fact that we need to build awareness, we need to educate, and then we need to try to convert after we've done the first two. So based on that, our plans are focused on different ethnic backgrounds, a lot of research and focus group work, our findings, and then determining the right location and opportunities to reach our target audiences. So we have 2 areas that we've spent the last year creating case studies that I'm going to be taking you through. To share a little bit about our focus group results. So our Director of Marketing Insights, Laura Alexander, and I spent the last year touring the country, basically, spending a lot of time on college campuses, everywhere from going to a Texas Tech, to the University of Alabama, to the University of Memphis, University of Illinois, Fresno State, Cal Berkeley, University of North Carolina, you name it, as well as local markets like DC, Philly, Atlanta, Charlotte. And we zeroed in on the African American and Black population, mainly because that is the lowest percentage right now, knowing that we are evolving into our Hispanic and other communities, as I shared in a previous slide. So here were the 4 key, really, like, takeaways, the nuggets that we're working on when it comes to our marketing and grassroots programs. No parachuting in. If you can guess what that is, that means don't just come in on a parachute, in a parachute, do an event, and then leave and think that you've been able to do your justice and telling us why it's so important to join the registry. Meet us where we are. Become one of the community, which is actually a commitment to the community, but understand our challenges, understand some of the misnomers, understand why there's been distrust in the healthcare community, and then talk to us about our challenges and let us know that you understand who we are and why we need a little bit of more information. And really that leads to just educating and building trust. So based on those 4 focus or those insights, we've actually evolved into how we're realizing we can't customize, we have to customize. There's no program that fits all, right? So it has to be customized to each marketplace and each audience. So this is just a snapshot of how we're actually thinking about how we engage the various communities. And again, we're evolving these communities, so it's not as if we have our full solution today to present. And actually, the African Americans are pretty much where we're really focused, and we're evolving into our Hispanic communities in the next 12 months. But ultimately, what we've learned, and there are a lot of other things, but this is kind of just, again, the nugget or the takeaway, is that when it comes to healthcare in the Latino Hispanic community, that it's really based on community roots. They want to know what their community is doing and welcome the opportunity to share with our community about what they're learning and hear from others in their community about what makes a difference to them and what counts. In the African American and Black communities, it's really about I'm going to take care of my own self-care. I'm the one that I can rely on, and that's what I know. And I'm going to do my own research and make my own decisions. And then in the API world, we're learning, and again, we haven't really even embarked on a lot of the API research. We're about to do that starting in January of 2019. But what we know is that give us qualitative and quantitative results, tell us some test results, and we can base our decision on what our doctor might share based on test results. And so this is how we are moving forward with putting together our integrated campaigns. And I truly, when I say integrated, that's what this slide is representing. We are combining partnerships with paid digital, recruitment events, student organizations, micro-influencers, public relations, and awareness events to build our campaigns. Now, based on that, the one thing that makes us unique, and we did hear from Cindy a lot about using your patients and your marketing. Our content, our patients who are searching and have the likelihood of dying, our donors who have stepped up and made the donation and have actually made this superhero experience happen, and our transplant recipients who now are on the other side of their illness and can talk about it, that's our content. That's what we use. There's nothing else. There's nothing else that we need to say. So I'm going to share a story about Camille and how we're taking it into a particular college demographic. every time I see one of our stories, I start crying, and I've seen it all the time. So
I was afraid you were going to make us.
I know, and I am. Sorry about that. I know, actually, Steve said, if you make a Manhattanite cry, no, then I've done my job. I'm like, all right, I'll try to do that, Steve. Is that right, Manhattanite?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. And I used to live here, but I have forgotten. All right. So here's just kind of a high level of how we created the foundation for our HBCU campaign. And for those of you who may not be familiar with what an HBCU is, it's a historically black college and university. And there are hundreds of HBCUs, or maybe, I'm sorry, maybe about 100. Right now, I can't, it doesn't come to me, but there are many, many HBCUs across the country. And we, again, we started last fall with focus groups, and we went on into the spring to do some test piloting on some campuses, and now we are in full swing. So be present, be a part of the community, provide education. One of the things that we learned last year was that by the way, our target audience, our registry is comprised of donors from the ages of 18 to 61, okay? Our target audience is primarily 18 to 34. Not to say that we don't welcome people who are interested in being on the registry who skew older than that, but due to medical reasons and just how cells can support 100% recovery, the 18 to 34 target audience is really key for us. So therefore, the college campuses are even that much more important because the 18 to 24 age group is really imperative for us to educate and get on our registry. So one of the things that we learned was that, don't give us FAQs. Our mom and our dad want FAQs. It's myth and facts. And so it sounds really funny, but we've been starting to instill a lot of creative components around myths and facts, and it's helping. It's supporting what they want to hear and how they want to hear it. Video is always the most preferred way, which is what we are doing. Our world is video. And be relevant. Digital platforms that they follow, we know, depending on your ethnic background and where you live and what kind of college campus it may be, if it's an HBCU or a Haku school, which is the Hispanic version of HBCUs, they all have different levels of social media platforms that they visit and utilize. So we're learning that as we go right now. And then influencers, this is key. In terms of finding the right people who can help us share our story. So story content, this is king. This is just a very small example. I mean, Brandon, Lauren, they're both incredible people. Their stories are amazing. They've donated. We have fantastic content that I wanted to share, but Steve said, you got to keep it short. So I would be happy to share it at some point if I send it out to all of you, but just amazing stories. They travel with us. Actually, Lauren was just hired to be an intern. We actually just created an internship program with our HBCUs. We've hired 6 interns to be our influencers and our advocates on campuses. We just did our training last Tuesday night, and they are staff members, and they're ready to go, and they really have our mission at heart. And then Sheldon and Camille, you just saw Camille. I mean, Sheldon's been searching for 5 years. He was on Good Morning America with us. He was just at our office. We did an Instagram story with him live. It was amazing. Myths and facts, again, a video that we've created in a PSA about just the disparity of what's, the reality of the disparity of our registry. So content is king. So again, I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm really trying to emphasize to you what it takes to build a very effective and grassroots campaign with your components of earned, owned, and paid media. We have grown from, I've been with Be The Match for about 2 years now. About a year and a half ago, we had 1 PR person, and now we have a team of 5, half PR, media PR, the other half social media, and then we have consistently 2 interns on each side of the house that we rotate usually every 6 months. So we have fresh people coming in off of school or during their college program that bring us amazing ideas. They're conducting social listening. We charge them with community management, which is a huge part of our strategy, because you have to really be listening to what's being said about donation process, some of the myths and facts, so that we can respond effectively, or we let the talk go on. Social media is a huge part of our growth strategy and our effectiveness organically. So getting back to Earned, you know, I talked a little bit about you know, the fact that once we have somebody, a story, whether it's Sheldon or it's Camille, that's what we do, is we push it out and we create relationships with various on-campus outlets, creating desk side interviews, because what happens is it catches on fire, you know, and then that earned media just starts to evolve. We develop relationship with micro-influencers, whether they're football players. We have a gentleman by the name of Derek McCartney who is out in Colorado. We shared his story last year. It took off with ESPN, and we're actually going to be bringing him back this Saturday night to share his story again. So he is a micro-influencer. He donated, and he is somebody that is in his community, in football, and has an amazing story. And then partnerships. We reach out and we talk to various professors, various student groups, and we try to influence the class curriculum. We plan on doing this even more so as we evolve our strategy on college campuses, as well as at the high school level. When it comes to our own strategies, as I mentioned to you, our social media, our organic social, is something that we're watching it. We have, you know, like daily stand-ups where we're talking about what's going on with social. If something popped at 9 o'clock the night before, we're all over it to figure out if we should engage some paid around the social. Shareable photo opportunities are huge. We do a ton around Snapchat filters in localized communities when we're doing events, football games. I can't say enough about the ways in which, you know, digital photographs are shared, and that alone creates a buzz and the ability to grow your brand and grow your story. Constituent emails, we do a lot with lead nurture emails. We have a team. I know that there's been a lot of reference around the journey of you know, a consumer. Journey mapping is something that we're evolving in terms of when somebody comes in and then how we continue to nurture them. And then we always are consistent about creating web properties so that people can see a story and then go to our website to understand anything that they want to learn about our efforts. So again, here are some other elements compared to the owned site. I'm going to kind of buzz through this because I know I'm going to be running out of time soon, which I have so much to share, and so I tried to really be very careful about not having too much on here. But this is a really crucial part of our strategy and what has worked. Our digital media efforts with various social platforms through the help of some of our paid media friends at Cicerone has evolved a lot of our stories, many, many stories. I mean, I want to say 25 stories over the last year into actual registrations of donors who see our consistency in the way that we're marketing our efforts and decide, yes, I'm going to register. And our numbers have gone from, I would say, roughly, you know, 400 to 500 registrations a day this time last year to roughly 1,500 a day, give or take. And a lot of it is due to the paid strategies that we have. And the out-of-home. You know, we know that between the digital media and out-of-home, that this is where a lot of our target audiences live and are, and that's how we reach them. And so we're doing more in the out-of-home, we're starting to, than we ever have. I know it sounds kind of like old school, but when you have an integrated campaign, you really need to understand how to be localized as well as, you know, digitally World Wide Web. So, and then again, the paid partnerships, I'm not going to go as much into that right now just because I want to continue. Here's an example of what we want to evolve our branding with some activation components. just to make it a really awesome experience. Whether we have live music, we have a lot of our metrics, our branding, and so forth. We're evolving what we look like on campus. This is an example, again, more of just how we can use some digital media components in an event activation and combine it into our social media campaigns, again, more out of home. And then some of our partnerships, the bullets that are bold are partnerships we're actually working in terms of getting to know executives or just even people that we know because we have relationships to figure out what's the best way to work with becoming a part of their community and ingrain our efforts with them. And then moving into local markets. This is where we are evolving mainly our Hispanic efforts right now. We're targeting these 5 markets. And we are doing a lot of integrated marketing around activations and events. And again, just like I showed you with the first kind of integrated picture, this is how we look at an education and registration event in a particular market. And with that, I'm going to share a story that we are now making national, I guess. But this is Sophia, and I'll just go ahead and... So Sophia's legacy lives on. Her dad is a huge, huge advocate and works with us immensely on interviews. And we have pushed her story out tremendously through the help of our owned and our paid channels. And you can just see here some of in the most recent months, we've had some amazing results through Facebook and Instagram with our video. And as you can see, registration clicks on Facebook, 920, engagements, 15,000. The metrics just really speak to themselves. And then most recently, when I just did a little check before I came here, we've been able to find over 19,000 new donors. And what's so amazing about it is that her story is really helping our diversity increase. I mean, traditionally right now, our numbers have been around 25% through our online channels, and out of the 19,000, we're seeing a much higher number there, and our goal for next year is to hit 40,000. So we're really excited about what's been happening using such a sad story. And then just a couple of other partners that we're talking to we are actually working with Univision and Media Planet. We are in Chicago, LA, as I mentioned, doing a lot of local market work. We have some DJs and influencers that we're working with that are paid. We try to find people who have close connections and ties, but sometimes it's not always the case. So we are figuring out if this is going to work to be authentic. And some of our creative. And then we've just been working, actually, with LULAC. We've been the League of United Latin American Citizens. I've attended a conference that they hosted this summer. We were just at an event in LA with them. So again, we're getting ingrained in the Hispanic community and meeting Hispanics where they are. And then these will be others that we're looking to consider. And this is just an example of our booth where we did a lot of, we tried to do some, just kind of cross-marketing and trying to, just become a little bit more ingrained by we're not trying to put everything in Spanish because that's not who we are either, but we're trying to meet Hispanics where they are and also, be who we are. So it's kind of a combination. So to sum it all up, aligning and focus and charting your course. Figure out through your focus group findings, target your plan on the audience that you're looking to define, determine the location and the opportunities, figure out where you want to be. You need to engage consumers with relevant content and a series of targeted media solutions. It's not just one, it's an integrated effort. Invest and plan around digital and video targeted content. Influencer, can't speak enough how key that is through Facebook, Instagram, a partner like Univision. Create memorable events and interactive experiences, and build grassroots around realistic goals and expectations. I'm telling you, this is not easy. We are not seeing thousands and thousands of people on college campuses registering, all at once. It's a slow drip process. It's getting ingrained with their community, and just hiring interns and becoming a part of what's going on. With that, thank you. Any questions?
Amy, thanks very much. Yeah, we have time for questions. Anybody have questions of Amy? Are you doing any attribution modeling? Since you're doing such a multi-channel effort, are you to the point yet where you're able at least be able to attribute some of this to particular channels?
Absolutely. We have we can see all on the back end of all of our video content posts through social and our paid efforts. Absolutely. We can track through what we call UTM codes and promo codes, everything down to a particular event or what we call a live drive in our field. We have about 100 plus people who actually work in the field and conduct events every day. So yes, when it comes to that broad funnel, that when you're building a brand and you're trying to reach the masses, it's a little bit harder to create that attribution, number. But we continue to talk about it and try to figure out how we get there, and we will.
Do you manage the social influencer piece in-house?
We do. Our social team is very much. I actually, when I work with that team, at our galas, I'll buy a table and I'll say, you go into New York and you invite YouTube influencer. You invite any influencer that will listen to you and might have a close tie to our mission. And our team's been doing that, and it's working. And we've had some amazing campaigns go viral with our influencers. I wish I had more time because there are some amazing results we've had with some of our influencers. So yes.
Amy, thanks very much.
Yep, thank you.
And believe me, Amy went easy on you because I've seen the other creative, and you would spend the afternoon crying. So we want to is social media the greatest boon to media, person-to-person communication, brand communication, and democracy, or is it the worst thing that's happened in the last 20 years to it? The answer is yes, to both. And that's, of course, the struggle that every brand has on social media channels, is how to navigate the incredible shawls and treacherous rocks that are there for any brand deigning to try to leverage that channel to talk directly to consumers. And at the same time, how one of the most powerful ways to communicate and to network good content, how it really can be used positively. To get a sense of, and then how all of this works within the traditional media buying and planning and brand strategy that every brand brings to this. To take the lead on this panel, we have an old friend of Media Post's, Andrew Eklund, who is one of the founders of Cicerone. How many years ago did you found Cicerone? 23 years ago, a digital-focused agency, one of the earliest. He's worked with a number of brands, including Be The Match, as well as the Children's Hospital of Minnesota. Please welcome Andrew Eklund.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, panel. This is going to be fun. I laugh sometimes. I think, Steve, it was in Pinehurst, you called me the grandfather of the internet, and I hadn't turned 50 until the next month. You a-hole. Anyways, so really happy to be here. And, this is also interesting because to talk about social media in 2018 is we are now clearly in a mature market for social. I think I've been hearing it all day that this is really the cornerstone of many of your activities. Just to put some perspective on that, I got my career started in the early 90s in what I would think of as maybe the original social network, maybe number 2, but in America Online. So don't laugh. We still use those discs as coasters, right, that they used to send out, but we were doing social networking all the way back then. But then all of a sudden, 2006, 2007, Facebook sort of comes out from under the college dorm rooms and takes over the world. And now all of a sudden, we find ourselves really at the precipice or at the nexus point, really, of how we use these networks to build brands. And so I have three great panelists here with me to really dig deep on this. And why don't we just go down and introduce ourselves?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Katrin Jean, Director of Client Services at Situation.
Hi, I'm Gary Keibel, and I'm an attorney with a law firm in New York, Davis & Gilbert, practicing a lot in the areas of digital media and marketing and privacy.
Hello, I'm Susan Waldman. I'm Chief Marketing and Communications Officer for Meals on Wheels America.
So in full disclosure, Situation and Meals on Wheels work together. So this is, you'll see a lot of familiarity there. So I think that's wonderful. And Gary is the, other than my wife, the only other attorney in the world that I like. So, no, Gary.
Yeah, we're friends on MySpace, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Still, yeah. Just the two of us. We're the last ones left. Yeah, this is great. What I would like to do, I'd like to start with Susan, if you will, because your story, I think, of how you're doing what you're doing, probably followed then with Katrin would be great. I think it's great fodder for this conversation.
I presume you're talking about the story about how we went from using social as for one or two purposes that we had across the organization to how it blew up into one of the major things we're doing as an organization. It was funny because it was a year ago, March. It's what we call our version of March Madness. And we had just, a couple of people in my department and I had just sat through a webinar on crisis management and laughed when they said everybody should have some kind of a strategy for what if Donald Trump attacks your company, which we thought was kind of funny at the time when we heard it. It wasn't long, though, before we had our social media was primarily used. We were really sleepy about it. We picked it up a lot when we put into the marketplace a campaign with the Ad Council to recruit volunteers, and we started to make a lot of good headway in recruiting volunteers. We needed a younger generation of volunteers, and we were plodding along in a really nice pace and very happy with what was happening until the president's new budget was announced a year ago, last March, that threatened to cut some community block grants that included funding for Meals on Wheels programs, which was picked up very early in the morning that day by the New York Times before it was actually, with the information that was leaked the night before. And out of nowhere, our phones started ringing off the hooks. Things went crazy. We turned half the organization into a PR response team, put them in a war room, conference room, and actually called Situation and said, help, because we went from having, just as I said, kind of little sleepy growing activity to we were being bombarded with messages that were coming to us. Most of them were in defense of us, almost all. I actually don't remember seeing any that weren't. But it took us from being kind of slow and sleepy to really needing to up our game and take control of what was going on, because a lot of what was being said wasn't true. So that was pretty much what threw us in there and got us started into what became a couple of weeks of very long hours. And I think we turned all of Situation into a Meals on Wheels response team for that. And then since then have really expanded how we're using it and gotten a lot more strategic with it. It was trial by fire, definitely.
Would you, if you were to go back in time, are you glad that it happened?
Yes.
Right. So what you wish wouldn't happen, you wish would happen again. So I would love to hear from Katrin in terms of what did that war room look like, and how were you governed in terms of responding?
Yeah, so it looked like me getting an email at 7:30 in the morning that's like, hey, Meals on Wheels is mentioned in this article. You might want to read it. And I was like, cool, uh-oh. So we sort of got in there, and we had one of our community engagement managers assigned to Meals on Wheels at that time, and so he was always, talking to people, and he also saw it right away in the morning. His name is David. He's lovely. And he was just like, what do we do? And I was like, guys, it's totally fine. We got this, because we have this document that we call the Rules of Engagement, which is basically before this had happened, we had established who we're going to talk to, what we're going to say, and what we're also basically what we're going to ignore. And so by sort of looking back at what we had already established as part of these rules of engagement, we were able to say, like, okay, this fits into this bucket there, so we know how we're going to respond. And the way that we set up those rules of engagement, which we do for all of the people that we work with, but went through the process with Susan and her team, and it kind of boils down to asking yourself 3 questions, which is, who are you always, who are you sometimes, and who are you never on social? So as a brand, how are you going to interact? Who are you going to interact with? What are you going to amplify? What are you going to ignore? And then when there's misinformation, how are you going to try to correct that if you are? So those kinds of questions and stuff. So we already had that a little bit set up. What Susan is talking about, the America Let's Do Lunch campaign, is a volunteer campaign to drive more volunteer signups. So we sort of had to look at it really quickly and be like, okay, we're not talking about volunteers anymore. We're talking about this now. So what's the factual information that we need from Susan's team? So we got all of our facts sort of ready to go. And then it just ended up being like tweeting for, like 3 days straight, pretty much. But then we sort of came out of from all the fog of that. So that was March 15th. So think about it like March 18th.
Not that anybody remembers the dates
Nobody
or
remembers
anything
the
like
date.
that.
But so 3 days later, we were like, okay, now what do we do with this? Our Twitter, following has increased by 1,000%, and that's not an exaggeration. It was really a lot like that. A lot of people were asking, how can I get involved? What do I do? How can I give money? So those were all the kinds of questions that we were directing everybody to, and had all the resources for everyone. And so we sort of said, okay, now we got this burst of attention. We got through it. Now what do we do with these people? And so that's sort of what Susan is talking about, how now since then we've been expanding the social media strategy and looking ahead. At the end of last year and then all through this year, 2018, we've been working on boosting all basically digital across the whole organization, with social really at that center point of everything that we're thinking about and that community that we still want to engage.
In a moment, I want to come back to how you've used that sort of boost to a whole new platform as a launching pad for maybe a renewed look at how social is going to play in this, because all of a sudden it played itself out in real time. Before I get to that, Gary, I'm sure you've seen lots of clients who have maybe experienced something like this. It could be some negative possibility or negative publicity, could be positive publicity. Can you name any, just off the top of your head, of where are the snakes and alligators, where are the bodies buried, where this could really, where brands maybe didn't quite play it the way they should have, or it sounds like they did a good job on this. What are some of the cautions that you might give to your agency clients?
Well, that's a good question. In this situation, this was more of a political PR issue. And so there you can be reasonably comfortable in terms of what you're saying, where I see companies have problems where there's potential legal exposure. Maybe there has been a security incident, or there's a problem with a product or service, and the first response is, I just want to go on social media, explain myself, say what's happening, and you have to be concerned, am I exposing my company to liability by being too forthright? There's always a benefit that being forthright for publicity purposes, but if you're admitting that maybe your company had a problem, or maybe there was information that was exposed, then you want to speak with your counsel and find the balance between what the marketing people want to say and what legal counsel is telling you you should say. And just in general with social media, with pharma, there's a lot of regulation, and so people are very careful about what they say. There's a lot of regulation from the FDA about pharmaceutical and prescription drug advertising and what you can say about a product or service. So you have to be very careful about what you say online, because if it doesn't line up completely with what you're permitted to say by the FDA, or maybe you're not following the FDA procedures, then you could expose yourself and actually create a problem. One example where you could create a big problem is, say you have a product which is authorized by the FDA to treat symptom A, but you're not allowed to talk about it treating symptom or disease B, because that's not what you're approved by the FDA for. And you post on social media and a user says, yeah, I took the drug, instead of just dealing with issue A, it took care of issue B. Then you have to be very careful. You don't want to click like on that. You don't want to repost that, because now is the company adopting that statement, which is probably a statement that can't be supported with science. So you have to be very careful about how you're interacting with people. Not that you can't do it, but just think about how you're interacting with someone, and are you overtly or making an implied statement that could come back and be a problem.
because I happen to know that lawyers don't necessarily like to move fast. Are you ever on the phone, like getting on the bat phone, like during one of these crises and have to sort of respond quickly or remind them what the rules are, whatever, but not at the same time to a point where you just throw cold water on it? Because this, like you just said, you just built a whole new platform. Is there a certain level of risk that's available? Or because you don't want to miss out on these opportunities. This is catching lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. Well, as you heard from Susan and Katrin, talking about the war room and the rules of engagement.
Yeah.
That applies, and sometimes legal is involved in that.
Yeah.
We've been involved with clients that are going to be involved in maybe a live tweeting event. And they want to talk, what are our rules of engagement for this? Because we can't run every statement by counsel. As much as, lawyers would love to have every tweet, run by them, we just can't do that. So we need to know what are the general rules of engagement.
You said about $7.35 per tweet. Is that what the rate
Yeah,
is now?
we have a special this week, $29.95 per tweet.
Okay, that's great. Susan, tell me a little bit about the befores and afters, because now you've had this, that was 2016, is that correct? 17, so a year and some months. Did that sort of prove to you that the social platforms were, it became more important and became a different part of your mix as you think about going to market because of that? And how have things changed?
Going back a little bit before that happened, several years before that, we as an organization couldn't come up with enough content to feed our social channels if we wanted to. We were working really, really hard to put something out. I will tell you now, we are fighting off departments, right? So across the organization, and luckily we've got a centralized system, across the organization, I think everybody's seen different ways to use it. It was interesting when you referred to social as a mature channel, which I guess it is, but it feels like it's changing all the time. And some of that is because every time you say something, you're talking for a different audience, a different reason, a different way of approaching it. You can't segment your audiences. You're talking, right, or when you buy you can, but otherwise we're talking to the same people. We're sending all different kinds of messages. So it's a lot of work to integrate it through. And when we came through our March Madness, we were very limited or very careful about what we could say from an advocacy standpoint. So we didn't have our lawyer in the room, but our head of advocacy never left that room because we had to be so careful. And in some cases you don't, in some you do, and it just always seems very different. But we were able to jump on that. It was a real threat, and the statement that was made by Mick Mulvaney on public television is programs like Meals on Wheels sound good, but there's no ROI. They're not returning anything of any value, which was the statement. And we have lots of research that backs that up. So we were pulling all that together, but then we wrote it quickly, and it was a quick move into an advocacy campaign, which we had never done before. So our pro bono ad agency, Anomaly, jumped in, Situation jumped in, and we pulled together an advocacy campaign that generated response or proactive outreach to what turned out to be 99% of Congresspeople and resulted in one of the largest increases in Meals on Wheels budgets that has ever happened since the beginning of Meals on Wheels. But largely because we fought it so hard. And it's a lot of work, and you have to be ready to ride it. Our initial response was, let's do a fundraising campaign. We couldn't react quickly enough for a fundraising campaign with our network, so we had to move it to an advocacy campaign, but did it with a lot of long hours. At this point in time, we're now sophisticated enough to have, with Situation's help, and a lot of input from across the organization, we're prioritizing all of our messages out to social media. So we've got how are we going to use them, and what types of messages are they supporting it, what frequency, so that over the course of a day, a week, a month, or a year, we're making sure that we're reaching our goals, but always remaining open to flex with it when we need to, when something happens.
So on this advocacy campaign, and I always have to remind myself that advocacy for many of us is advocacy towards Congress or Washington, not social advocacy that we might think of for advocates and influencers.
We're in D.C., so you have to remind us that it doesn't mean that to everybody.
I have to remind myself all the time. I'm curious about how did you, or how do you in general, now I think we can get off the case study for a moment, but how do you resist the temptation to, and this goes for some of maybe your other clients as well, and Gary, what you've seen, how do you resist the temptation to have to respond to every negative comment? How do you compartmentalize them, measure whether it's coming from somebody sitting in their mom's basement late at night, or, you know, or somebody who truly has influence, especially if that message comes down from someone in your senior leadership team who says, I saw this last night, what's our response going to be? I want to get back a little bit to this governance, and so how are you measuring sentiment? How do you decide when is it okay, when should we respond, and when should we just let that short attention span of social let it die out and bury itself? And if you want to talk also as well about other clients that you've done that for.
Yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit. And part of it, again, goes back to that rules of engagement, like you just can let it go. But the other thing, I think, is that if you're really nurturing this community and engaging with people, they will do it for you, so you don't actually have to say anything as the brand. And that's, I think, a true, like, great, when you're facilitating and talking to a community that does that, like, you know you're doing it right. Because they're like, we work with like a lot of shows too, so to just take it out of this context for a while, but like somebody might comment like, oh, that Broadway show that I saw was the worst, and then like immediately following it, 20 people will be like, you're wrong, go away. So it's like, great, you don't have to actually say it as the brand because you're having other people do it. I think in the case of the boss saying like, I saw this tweet, what are we going to say back to them? Hopefully you've been having conversations with them about why maybe you should just ignore the trolls. But if not, I mean, then I think it's a moment to sort of say, like, okay, like, what would you like to say back to him? Like, why do we think it's important to respond to this? How are we going to? And also, if you really make me post that, like, this is going to then be a conversation, so maybe we should not do that. But I think it's important to hear people out and why they want to respond and how would we respond. Like, let's talk it through, and we do that a lot. Like, how are we going to handle the situation? Are we going to respond? Because sometimes it's not just a yes, no. It's a what would we do? Okay, and then, and then. And in the end, I would say most of the time it ends up being like, we don't have to do that, but it's good that we had this conversation so that we know for next time.
And of course, there's a very fine line these days between a troll and a very influential politician. So, Gary?
Yeah, I would say, and you also look at whether it's a positive statement or a negative statement, and that can trigger a legal obligation. If it's, again, my example earlier, if it's a positive statement, this drug had this great effect on me for this off-label use. Well, then you got to be careful. You don't want to jump in and say, that's awesome. I'm so glad that worked for you, because if that's not what the drug is approved for, then you have a problem. The reverse, there's something that the FDA has, which is called adverse event reporting. And that's what scared off most pharmaceuticals from social media in the early days. And basically it means that if a consumer gives you notice that they had some adverse effect from the medication, you have to tell the FDA. So somebody's on Facebook and they're on your page and they post, I took your, cold medication and my hair fell out. You've got to now, you have an affirmative obligation to go and tell the FDA about that.
Wait, even if they just post it on Facebook?
It goes on your
officially
page.
Reporting to
on
you?
your page.
Oh my God.
Yes. Which is why initially a lot of brands were afraid to go online because they're like, I don't want to know all this stuff. If someone sends me a letter and they tell me about these bad things, I'll go and tell the FDA. Now I've got all these, comments and tweets and posts, and the FDA has given a little bit of guidance, but not great guidance, because, if you have a page and you get, 10,000 comments, a week, how can you go through all of them and analyze them? And the FDA is indicating that the real-time nature of it, there's not an obligation, but if you see it, and again, that danger, you clicked, oh, I'm sorry, or, you clicked like and did the sad face or something like that, yeah, you wouldn't click like, but click the bad face, now you know about it. And you actually then have a legal obligation to go and tell your regulators.
Susan, on the Meals on Wheels side of it, you had mentioned on our call that, you might get some sort of customer service complaints like mom didn't like her meal today or whatever, and do you have to develop an engagement policy around what might seem like the most mundane?
We're, I'm not sure why you're laughing, but we're, I think, extremely fortunate in that we don't get a lot of negative, but if we do, it's usually that. Yeah. The meals are not good, don't like the meals. And honestly, I'm not sure what it is, what our response is to that, but they're very few and far between. And if we see them, we'll pass them on to the local program if we see there's really an issue. And I mean, Keitra made a comment earlier about it's really about engagement with the audience. So even though there's some exposure or risk in some ways to do it, the whole idea of it is this gives you a media where you can engage with your audiences, you can develop and continue relationships that you have with them. So we try to handle what we can in as good a way as we can, and only ignore it if it really seems like it's kind of going to cause a problem to do so.
I'd like to, let's turn this back to the positive, because I really think this is a very positive part of brand building. Tell me a little bit about how you are discovering your own brand stories through the interactions that are coming from your fans and the community, and how have you used those insights, whether it's to leverage them to other campaigns or to, we just talked about it out here, just it's almost like it's like live market research to inform the language you might use in a campaign or the creative you might use, or do you use what you see in the public and ask for permission to reuse that the way Amy has or whatever and be the match? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, there are times we do that, and our engagement is never, it's always part of a kind of a multidimensional look at what we're putting out there, right? So everything we do has to, first of all, be on brand. It's got to be brand personality, it's got to be brand voice, it's got to be consistent with the major brand messages that we're trying to get across. In our case, everything we do has to be focused on it's more than a meal. Everybody knows the meal part. What they don't know is that somebody's actually coming, talking to somebody, knocking on the door, giving them some socialization in the day, and that's the piece that has to be central to what we're doing. So those things inform all the decisions we make. So those are the kinds of stories we're looking for. Those are the kinds of things that we're focusing on and the kinds of messages we put out. We do, sometimes we'll repost, retweet something if we see it. We get a lot of our content from our local members. So there's 1,000 member programs for Meals on Wheels America. They're all local community programs. So we actually work with them primarily to get the content. We either go directly and do what we're doing or work with them and don't do as much reaching out to people who are conversing with us for their stories.
So Gary, can you give us a little bit of the playbook about what a brand needs to do from a checklist, a legal checklist, compliance checklist, if, let's just say, an amazing story is captured via cell phone by one of Susan's customers, and it's a delivery, and they captured it, and the customer, do you call them customers, or I guess?
Clients.
Clients. Just has a smile on their face because they've had this wonderful socialization for the day, and it's just captured beautifully. Yep, herky-jerky, cell phone, no big deal. And they say, boy, we couldn't even, there was no way we could film that level of authenticity. We couldn't hire actors to do it. It's just that right there. What do they need to do to potentially use that story and either amplify it or use it in a paid media post?
Right, and when we say ad, you need to realize that even for a not-for-profit, for any organization, when you're reposting content and putting it out there, it's an ad. So it's not like in your personal life where you see something interesting that a friend posted and you want to take it and do it elsewhere for your personal use. Everything you're doing is commercial. So when you're doing it with commercial, you have to analyze, do you have the right to use this information? And what normally, and Susan's indicating that you might get the right, for someone to use their story and post it. When you're on one platform, say someone tweeted, at the organization and said something positive, retweeting within the same platform and keeping the content there, probably, that's fine, that's okay, very low risk. Yes, someone could make a technical legal claim, but really never happens. But the more likely thing is someone posts something, you say, that's great. I want to grab that content. I want to put it on my website. I want to show stories of people engaging with us and having a good experience. For those, you need to get a release from the individuals. And it doesn't have to be a very formalistic, document. It could be a very simple release. You could direct message them, get them to an acknowledged release, but there's a thing called right of publicity. And you can't take someone's image and their likeness to use it for a commercial purpose, which any of these ads would be a commercial purpose, without their permission.
So a release will cover you for, to amplify that. I suppose there's some sort of crazy risk that you want to do a background check on that person, that they're, a member of some crazy fringe group or something like that. But I suppose that's just part of the risks along with, well, it's the story. Their background and everything else, we're not going to mess with that. But that might be one of those things where it keeps people away, but at the same time, it's like we don't want to lose the story.
Yeah, if it's going to be something you put on your website and you have, 100 different interesting stories, probably no one's going to go to that level. But if you want to put it on a billboard in Times Square, someone's going to do this story. And there's a lot of little wrinkles here. And I talked about maybe, the volunteer maybe took a photo on their phone of the client, being happy. Well, you actually have two issues there. You have the release from the client who's in the photo, and actually the volunteer who took the picture actually technically owns the copyright in that photo. So you actually have multiple parties involved there. So there is a process of clearing things here. Again, if you're on the platform, you're just doing a quick retweet, probably not a big issue. But if you're going to take things, pull it out, develop, a portfolio, use it off platform, then you got to consider these rights.
Kate, do you have some examples of where you and your creative team have been inspired perhaps by something you've seen that's happened organically? You've decided to use that as sort of a kernel of almost like a live creative brief to say, let's build on that, or put some paid behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we're always like tracking sentiment and reporting and stuff like that, and you're seeing what kind of content your audience is naturally responding to. So one of the things that we do is we put stuff out there, see how people respond, what are they coming back with, and then we'll actually develop more content streams or buckets or whatever jargon you want to call it, and that's double down on what people actually want. So I think it's not only the interaction, but then what people are sharing with us. In the case of Meals on Wheels, we try to get a lot of some of the local programs, like Susan is saying, are very active on social. So we'll even sometimes go check out what are they doing today, and how's it going out in San Francisco, and that kind of stuff, and see what their campaigns are about. And so those kind of live brief situations definitely come up, and we're like, oh, let's amplify them and help them tell this story, and just build out that content stream that we have for this. I think the other thing that is maybe the livest brief is hashtags, right? So your fans all start using a certain hashtag, and you're like, wait, they're talking about us, or they made a cool pun, or whatever. Let's sort of give our stamp of approval on that by using it ourselves, and then again that facilitates the engagement and the building of the community, because you're taking something that they made, but also, of course, giving credit, and everyone wants to be credited for their smart, funny idea on social, so definitely do that. But I think those moments happen, and they can go by really fast, and I think part of that, the role of the community manager is not to be diminished. I think that person who really knows your community and is interacting with those people and having those conversations day after day after day is the best person to know when that moment is happening, and they can sort of help you pinpoint, oh, this is a thing that we should amplify and jump on because I'm seeing it, take off really fast, or I know that they're going to respond really well to this. So the interaction between their brand manager or whoever is on your marketing team and that person who's actually doing the community engagement, I think is also a really important part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, and actually, Andrew, I'll jump in. We're talking about grabbing interesting stories, grabbing interesting content. There's the flip side. Invite the public to come and give their stories. That makes it a lot easier than in terms of getting them. So, set up a portal, encourage them to post it to your page, and get them to interact with you and bring the stories to you, and that makes it a lot easier to manage that.
Do you need to gate that at all? Sorry.
I was going to say, include that check mark that says, you can use this.
Yes.
Done.
I've agreed to these terms and conditions. Then in terms of the social media monitoring, you do want to, maybe do, filtering, and searching what's there. Again, you don't want someone to be uploading things that are offensive or, just wrong about your brand. And if you control the platform, you might be taking out things that are negative. You don't want to skew it in such a way that you've implied that this is a collection of all the honest stories that we receive out there, and then you pull out the bad ones, you highlight the good ones, and you almost then turn it into a little ad for yourself that's not actually reflective of your product or service. So again, there are some guidelines and rules of the road to do that correctly, but in general, a lot easier if you have the public come in and offer up the stories themselves.
So one of the complexities that we've run into, and I'm curious in your case as well, Susan, we certainly run into it with Be The Match, is there's almost a multi-generational lines in the sand, if you will, across these social networks. So unlike MySpace, which everybody loved and everybody was on, Gary, Facebook tends to skew now older, my kids, I have a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old. The 21-year-old, hate to know that I just called him a kid. You know, they don't go on Facebook, right? They're on Instagram in one area and then Snapchat for everything else. Facebook is for grandparents, now parents and grandparents. So a lot of your stories are probably told in Facebook, but could get amplified by children and grandchildren and maybe the general public in these other channels. What do you do to try and align internal sort of social literacy, social network literacy across staff to staff this? And I'm sure you lean probably quite heavily on situation as well.
Yeah, and volunteer recruitment has been our major push on social media for the last several years. That's been the major area. And we actually have two different audiences. We've got the 55 plus, and then we've got the 18 to 25 or something. For good reason. That's a tough split audience. The fact that the platforms naturally skew that way makes it a little bit easier for us to target our messages a little bit differently and to language them differently to some degree from platform to platform. But it means we need them all, right? We need to be out there because older people have time on their hands to volunteer, and we need younger people to do it. So because there aren't enough older people to do it. So we're kind of working with that every day, and we're much stronger on Facebook and Twitter. We're trying to build up more on Instagram, and mostly just being aware. I think that's the situation and who we're talking to through each of the platforms, and just tweaking from one platform to the other. We usually use the same messages across the platforms, but we might tweak the way we actually go about them.
So the campaigns themselves, or the KPIs that you're trying to measure against, volunteerism, advocacy, client acquisition, you know, you might use a completely different social network with a completely different content plan, depending upon what it is that you're going after. You can't have a one size fits all.
Yeah, we don't separate it that much. So we're still learning and as I said, we keep increasing the number of messages that we're using on social. So we're learning and we're tweaking it and we're kind of meandering. But we at this point there's not that much of a designation from platform to platform for us. We're really across the board. Most of our messages, very few of our messages are meant toward one specific narrow audience, slice of audience. We don't do client recruitment, or that would be a very specific, you had to be a senior, but we don't do client recruitment on social. So the other things we want people to do really spans across the age groups, or we want it to span across the age groups.
Right. And you have influencers as well, right? You have the children of your clients, the support people of your clients, who may actually be
Right.
the influencers.
Absolutely.
They may not be actively pursuing Meals on Wheels themselves, your clients.
Right.
It's a support person.
Most of the conversation you hear is my mother this, my aunt that, my grandmother this. That's most of the conversation that you hear.
Yeah.
And they're an extremely important group for us, right? So that's who we're talking to more specifically.
Wonderful. Steve, do we need to go to questions?
Yeah, let's see if the social topic has to have questions. And we've got a lawyer here who's giving free advice for the next 10 minutes.
Free advice for the next 15 minutes.
Right.
I'll throw out a piece of free advice while you're thinking about this. In addition, you always need to think about the platform's policies and their rules. They all have different policies. They change all the time, which is very challenging. So if you're thinking about doing some campaign for contributions to raise money, or do a sweepstakes, or do something to engage with with your followers, you need to think about the platform's guidelines, because you don't want to spend a lot of time and effort to create a fantastic campaign. You put it up on the platform, and then the platform takes it down. So another piece of free legal advice to take home with you.
So I've got a question for the audience. I want to turn it on you for a second. I wrote this down earlier, and I realized that we may not have the answers up here. You said something at the very beginning, Steve, that the internet is perhaps the most horrific source of truth around medical conditions, and Dr. Google is not so great. So I am wondering, from those of you who are on the care side, are we required by, almost by a Hippocratic oath, to do no harm and to provide care, and I don't know what the Hippocratic oath is other than the term, are we obligated as care providers to participate in these channels where we know misinformation is, if we know we have the information that could set the record straight in a truthful and fact-based way? Are we obligated to participate in these social channels? And if you have an opinion on that, I'd love to know.
Let's see what the audience thinks first. I see heads
All
going
right,
left and right, up and down.
let's do a vote. Who says yes, we are obligated to take part in these conversations in social channels?
Yeah. And so if we say no,
Does that mean the rest of you don't?
I think it's interesting
Good.
because I think what we're saying is then the community is allowed, and therefore our Hippocratic oath to do no harm, to care for people, is only within the exam rooms or the surgical rooms or whatever else, but it does not translate, and I'm not saying necessarily from a legal standpoint, or maybe I am.
No, it is. I mean, and this is one of the questions the industry has been begging the FDA for guidance. You know, what's my obligation? You know, if I have a Facebook page or I have a blog and there's all these comments and half of them are wrong, what's my obligation to post, correcting information, to scan them? You know, how far do I go? And the industry's been asking the FDA for guidance and has not gotten it. The best guidance we got was in 2014. There was this document about post-marketing reporting about, because in the old days, when you put out a commercial or a print ad, you had to simultaneously deliver that to the FDA. And so the industry was saying, well, what do I do in this real-time world? Do I have to submit every post to the FDA so that they have it, which would be a nightmare? And the industry was really looking for guidance, and the process kind of stalled about 4 years ago when there was one guidance document that came out, and there's been no follow-up since then. So it's still an open question.
I would imagine, for example, if you are a health system and it's the flu season, and you're an insurer, and you're trying to encourage all of your members to go out and get a flu shot, and then an anti-vaxxer gets onto your page and starts to spew on your page, starts to spew anti-vaccination information, because it's on your page, are you not obligated to at least shut it down? It's your page, so I assume you can shut it down, but are you also just obligated at a higher level, that Hippocratic oath, to respond with factual information? Or is that just a brand choice?
It might turn in part about, what are they saying? Are they saying in general, we don't like vaccinations? Or are they saying, I took that vaccination
And I got sick.
and I got sick? And that's a very different situation.
So we should just unplug it all. All right. Any other questions?
No? Yep. Over here. Yeah, corner.
Hi, my name is Kelly, and I'm from Influence Central. So this kind of touches a bit on what we do because my company does influencer marketing. And over the years, we've worked with a few pharmaceutical brands who are willing to take that risk, and I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of AE training and regulatory board discussions and all of that really fun stuff. And I think it's very interesting to hear everyone's perspective on, I think, the industry is at a little bit of a, I don't want to say a plateau or stalemate, but there are so many risks inherent to working with influencers, putting a personal voice on social. And a lot of the clients that we work with, sometimes we'll have discussions for a year plus, bringing a drug to market and wanting to talk about it in a very informative way and still engage influencers and their consumer base on social. But there are so many guidelines that we have to follow. And when you're talking about reporting every AE on every platform and the daunting task that it is, I think it also kind of stretches that bridge on authenticity as well, because a lot of times our clients will say, we want to engage a group of influencers to talk about this drug that we're bringing to market, the specific uses, but we want the influencers to turn their comments off on their blog. So then how authentic is that? What will that do ultimately for engagement? And if we're saying that engagement will relate to ROI, what are these companies getting from that in the long run. So kind of hearing everyone's take on it is really interesting, and I think we're at a weird crossroads, I think, in the industry in terms of healthcare brands coming into market and working with influencers in the social space. So it's kind of enlightening to hear.
Yeah, and you may know about this story that I'll mention, but there was an issue with, forgive me, I don't know which Kardashian on social media, but there was a Kardashian who was pregnant and was using a morning after pill, or I'm sorry, a morning sickness pill, and had posted about the effects of the pill and how helpful it was with morning sickness, and then got a letter from the FDA saying that you didn't make the required disclosures about the side effects from using this medication. And even though the influencer is using this medication, you need to have these disclosures about possible side effects. Sierra Ed and Golf Magazine. You have to have something to say it. And so the FDA is looking at this, and they're looking at what influencers are doing when it comes to this space. Not to say you can't do it. You can do it, but then, to your initial point, have guidelines and rules of the road so that you don't get yourself in trouble.
Yeah. Even like glossaries will do, which I'm sure you have as well. If you want to use this word, use this one instead.
Yes. But then if you hire a Kardashian, you just got to assume the risk.
There's another risk involved with that.
I think pregnancy is a side effect of being a Kardashian, but sorry. We have one more here. Do you have time?
I was just saying hi. Alexandra Gilson from CMI Media. I run a lot of our paid social programs for pharma companies. We had AZ here before. So a big workaround, a lot of pharma companies are scared of the comments that comes along with social advertising. So a lot of things that we've been doing for our clients at CMI is Facebook, the big ones, let's say Facebook and Twitter. They have workarounds for that where you can promote on those platforms and have all comments turned off, all engagements turned off on those posts. So that's a way we get our clients kind of comfortable with the idea of being on social media to begin with, and when they get their feet wet and they get more comfortable with it, we can turn on those engagements again, and once they're ready to instill that community management, which is a must if you're going to be advertising with comments on and all that good stuff. So
I would say that when social media flipped the switch a few years ago from organic to paid, it was probably, even though it was going to cost brands more money, so to speak, the reach that they were getting from organic were false numbers anyways. And they were increasingly invisible, which is why the major networks turned it off anyways, because the organic reach wasn't interesting to their users. And so the fact that they went to a paid model, really, again, even though it cost a lot of money, was much more brand safe and gave the brands much more control. And so I think this conversation today has been a lot about organic, which I think is really interesting, and I think as a nonprofit, the organic side of this is extraordinarily important. I know it is for Be The Match and for community building and boots on the ground, but at brand level, I think 70% of the money we spent last year in digital media was in the social space. Turn it on, turn it off, A/B test the crap out of it, audience segment till you bleed. I mean, it's just like amazing amount of stuff that you can do on that you never had in organic, and it feels more natural, I think, for marketers and advertisers, and a lot more control. So I think that is why we're seeing that.
Where did you find those of us who have been on Facebook maybe 3 times this year?
Where do we find you?
Yeah. Well, those of us.
I know where I find you. You're on a trail running someplace out in the woods.
Yeah. If you're on social channels, where are you actually spending the money? I mean, we increasingly are seeing more of the budgets still go to Facebook, even though we know that there are vast amounts of audience that are simply being missed by that platform. Even though, for all of those great reasons you cited, there's good reason to spend money on Facebook, except for the fact that a great many eyeballs just never go there anymore.
The problem is the numbers still add up. I mean, on a performance basis, on an ROI basis, the social advertising numbers still perform extraordinarily well. I'm not just talking, I'm saying Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, Twitter, LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn's B2B products have gotten a lot better in the last year for B2B. So I think what we're finding is that there sure is enough audience there to reach them. Now, brand awareness campaigns, huge. I mean, YouTube is now what, the number 2, you know the numbers. Number 2 search engine on the internet. And we don't even talk about YouTube, but I bet you for 9 out of 10 of you, YouTube might be the most important channel, and we didn't even talk about it. You know, it's fascinating.
You had a question on that side. Sorry.
This has been fascinating. Beatriz Mallory, Census Health. This has been fascinating, but as a cross-cultural agency, all I can do is sit here and think, all right, so what happens when you add Spanish or Mandarin or, shall I go on? Particularly to the attorneys who want to pull their hair out if they are not multilingual, and they don't want to trust it to a paralegal who is. So I guess my question really is, as you start looking at the diversification of your audiences, how are you keeping up with respect to what you're doing in the, quote, general market, unquote, as your general market changes?
I mean, I can just say, excuse me, what we've sort of started to do, to your point, is targeting the messaging. And I think that's almost where your comment about paid actually is really well timed to this question too, because then you can, you know, literally put that message in that language in front of people who speak that language. And so that's one other way that paid is actually really helping to target the people in those other, you know, other niche, we call them niche markets, whatever, niche targeting, niche interests, whatever, that you want to get at. And add that level of diversity. We're absolutely, you know, adding, versioning the content. What message resonates with those people versus your general brand? What do you want them to talk to? What sort of content do you want them to engage in? And then layering that on. And I think that's where like the complexity of all of this marketing strategy really comes into play, and the executing the plan against that overall brand strategy, and getting that message in front of the specific person. And I think it's imperative to have those versions and to reach out in that way, because especially if it's important to you as a brand to do that, and then you should absolutely be extending that on social, not just in like that one pamphlet that you print once a year or whatever.
The targeting is the least of our problems, right? That's the least of our problems. It's the content development. And again, I'm just going to talk to Be the Match again, and I apologize, but you know, the HBCU market, the AFA market, Hispanic market, those are core markets for us. And what we've realized is that the organic stories really fuel the voice of the community. And then if we're not mining that for intelligence, for language intelligence, for concerns intelligence, just names and faces and the embedded culture of that, we're not doing. And if we are not involving people from those cultures in our creative briefing process, big miss.
That's actually the next thing I was going to say. That's why I picked up the mic, but you just said it.
But it's also delivery of the product in a way that is relevant to that audience. Mm-hmm. You know, from the standpoint of, I work for a hospital system. Marketing to niche audiences, to do that, we've got to be able to deliver that product in a way that we speak their language, we operate it culturally the way they do. We deliver that product in a real, authentic way. And if we're not doing that, they're going somewhere else.
And if you can't do it,
don't do it.
Yeah, we work with the Children's Hospital in Minneapolis, and they are in the middle of the second largest Somali population outside of Somalia. And, you know, to be able to connect with that community, and this is a first generation, if not second generation, immigrant population, so English is still very much a second language. We know that we have connections to those communities. They're just not in the marketing department. So you have to build bridges to people to make sure that, like, I'm not sure I want to, I mean, I will, but, you know, to have them be a part of a creative advertising briefing process, not that interesting for them. To have them come in and have a roundtable and tell us about what is their life like delivering a baby, even being pregnant within your community. Are you getting the support that you need? I'm sure for you, and you know, in your case, are you getting the support in your home? Do you have transportation issues? You know, there's lots of other challenges around that, I'm sure.
Yeah, and in our case, we're fortunate enough to have local people on the ground in virtually every community across the country. So we have people on the ground who can actually reach out into those communities and handle it that way, which is, I don't know how we'd do it if we didn't.
So
Says the panel of white people.
So Andrew panel, we're going to break for coffee now, so people can come up and talk to you then. But thanks, that was very stimulating.
Thank you.
We have a small change in schedule I want to let you know of. We are going to break for coffee now, but because of, and how the deep irony of this has to be appreciated, we have lost our case study to the flu. At a healthcare event, we have lost somebody to the flu, so we won't be hearing from Thinks today, but I hope we'll have Kajal back at another time. But we will come back to round out the day with our panel talking about creative. We'll view a little bit of the creative that's out there now and talk about how we can get beyond the stock footage and the slow-mo smiles. So take some coffee. We'll be back in about, let's do this in about 15 minutes.